thank you for joining us today on this most sort of soggy and rainy day. But hopefully we are going to shine a little bit more light on the day with the fifth of our talks at Planted Countries Save Our Soils event, brought to you in partnership with the National Trust and filmed on the deck of our beautiful off-the-grid handmade cabin created and designed by Out of the Valley. My name's Oliver Heath and I'm the Biophilic Design Advisor for Planted, the first and only commercial event aimed at reconnecting people, spaces and nature. In this series of talks we are, I'll just explain. At Planted we want to make the commercial case for designing with nature in all aspects of our lives to ensure that we can create a cleaner, greener and healthier, more sustainable future. In this series of talks we're exploring why Earth matters and why the Earth is so important for food, farming and nature, and asking ourselves what role design has to play in encouraging the use of local materials whilst reducing the demand for natural resources. And today we're going to be discussing the subject of, can gardening save the planet? As a designer, I passionately believe that the way that we treat our homes reflects the way we feel about the wider environment around us. As a biophilic designer, I believe that our enhanced nature connections are a stepping stone to a wider aspiration to conserve our planetary environment. It is, of course, in the garden that these nature connections are most readily evident, and the wider benefits become clear, whether that's to ourselves, to the fauna and flora around us, but also to the wider planetary environment. So how can we create, cultivate and maintain our gardens in a way that actively supports and regenerates the health and well-being of the planet and the environment we live in, whether that's our own homes or our shared home, the planet Earth? So, here to discuss this most vital of subjects are three fascinating experts who have an enormous amount of experience. We have, starting here, Lulu Urquhart from Urquhart and Hunt, Melissa Jolly of Melissa Jolly Design, Garden Design, and Adam Hunt from Urquhart and Hunt. So I'll be asking each of our panellists to introduce themselves for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to have a panel discussion, and then at the end we'll have time for questions. And if you've got a question, and I would encourage you to put a question mark at the end of it, that we don't have too many statements, because I do tend to cut you off. I will definitely cut you off if it's a statement. So we'll have time for questions, so write them down and we'll have 10 or 15 minutes at the end. So, to start us off, I'd like to invite Lulu to tell us a little bit about your background, your passion, your interest, and what you think gardening might be able to do to save the planet. Lulu.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. It's lovely, this is an amazing event. Thanks Oliver. And thank you Mark as well, that was brilliant. Really nice to follow you. So my name's Lulu Urquhart and I'm very honoured business partner and design partner with Adam Hunt, and our studio is based on Bruton High Street here in Somerset, and it's called Urquhart and Hunt, and we're a landscape design studio focusing on ecological restoration, because we believe that we are part of the restoration solution, and we are the restorer species, and it's something that we want to keep focused on and keep prioritising as we work in this day and this age. I'm a mum of two beautiful boys, and I came into landscape design through organic farming and an understanding that I needed to work with the soil. I needed to get my hands. I sort of saw myself, without knowing any plants or any anything about gardening. I could see myself with my hands in the soil with a little kid on my back in my 20s, and so I decided just to follow that, and here I am. With my hands in the soil and some kids a bit bigger now than on my back. And so through organic farming I started to learn about plants and herbs. Then I studied Ayurvedic medicinal herbs and how the British herb law translated from that into our our systems for healing. And then from that, I wanted to grow healing things and spaces for people. And that's led me to here. Yeah. And I can speak a bit more about it, but I think I'll leave it there.
Okay, well, or maybe Adam can tell us more about that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Melissa.
Yes, lovely to be here. Thank you very much for having me, and lovely to see everyone here. I'm Melissa Jolly. I am a garden designer. Been doing it for just over the past decade. And I came into garden design probably a similar type of way. I didn't have massive amounts of horticultural knowledge, but I loved being outside and working with the soil. And I had previously worked making wildlife documentaries, so wildlife was always my kind of first passion. Moving on to garden design because I felt that I could run it, being a mum, and work for myself. And then I was lucky enough 5 or 6 years ago to move to a house that had a decent sized garden, and it's been a sort of 5 or 6 year transformation of developing a wild garden and growing food and learning to grow food and very much teaching myself. And then that has slowly morphed into the way that I now design for clients. So people are seeking me out more if they want a wilder garden or if they want to grow food and herbs. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Thank you. And Adam, and maybe you can tell us more about Urquhart and Hound as well.
Okay. Hi everyone, good to see you. I'll talk first about how I was lying in the bath this morning thinking about how can gardening save the world, because that's quite a big ask. And for some reason I went back to my childhood, and I remember I was talking about it with Lou the other day. The first plant I fell in love with was a little wooden anemone at the end of our garden. And my mum and my grandma, they were great gardeners, and there was all this fantastic show going on. But for some reason there was this small little clump of wooden anemones at the end of the garden, and they sort of were speaking to me. And that started my love affair with plants. I was very lucky to have my godfather, the Reverend Mole, was in the great tradition of sort of amateur botanists, although his part-time job was being a vicar and his full-time job was studying plants. And I loved his garden because it was crazy and wild, and there were always sort of things under the microscope. And a good friend of the family was Tony Schilling, who was the curator of Kew Gardens at Wakehurst Place. So I had this lovely introduction to plants at a young age, and I took it further and studied plant ecology at university, and then for my postgrad. But so just very rapidly, I went on to work on farmers markets. I tried meeting my own vegetable needs. For me and my partner, we tried to grow our own veg, to be self-sufficient on veg for a couple of years, and realised how hard that is. Went into walled gardens, working in walled gardens, and then came into design. And like Melissa and Lulu, the reason that I do it is because I love nature, and I want to have a positive impact. In terms of the work we do, Lulu and I have developed a bit of a way of working which takes into account the ecology of the local area. So any project that we work on, there's an incredible, I'm giving our secrets away here, there's an incredible website that DEFRA have got called Magic Maps, and you can find all the landscape designations, you can find what wildlife, what nature reserves there are around there, what are priority species. And so when we work on a project, we'll look at that picture, and then we also look at the cultural picture, because there's the human interaction. I learnt this with Sue and Angela, who are sitting here. The human interaction in the local, the vernacular expression of the human interaction is our conversation with nature down through the decades and the centuries. And so Lou and I try to always work within those constraints. And of course we do planning applications, and of course we can do borders, but it's the areas at the edges that we're interested in, where people are prepared to allow nature in. And those projects have got larger and larger, so now quite often that's the main part of our work.
Okay, Great, thank you. I'm conscious about this kind of, it's quite a big statement, how can gardening save the world? I mean, one garden is just a drop in the ocean, really, isn't it? You know, but where do we start? You know, lots of us do have access to open space, and I'm quite keen for this conversation to kind of think about that subject matter at different scales, from a macrobiotic scale to a human well-being scale, but also the impact that might then have on the kind of wider planetary environment if we realise that there is a movement, there is change going on. So maybe you can paint a picture for us, each of you, or what sort of poor garden design looks like. And it can be at any of those scales.
What poor garden design?
Yeah.
You don't know that, do you?
No.
You must walk
Absolutely
in.
no idea.
You probably know. You probably know.
Too much concrete.
Yeah. What does it look like?
Well, I'm thinking about a very subtle piece of planetary beauty, which is where insects lay eggs. Like, Mark was touching on it, this mass species decline. And we've just seen it in this lifetime just go like that, haven't we? And I'm, just seeing that there's potentially a couple of deviled bit scabious where the marsh fritillary butterfly will lay its eggs on the leaves.
Yeah.
And this is a species now in red list. And it might only choose one of those deviled bit scabious, because if the soil temperature around the deviled bit scabious is too low, it won't lay its eggs there. And if the soil temperature is just right, there's enough soil as opposed to maybe some leaves, too many leaves or grasses around that first one, a bit low temperature. If it's a bit warmer, it's going to lay. So it's not even finding plants suitable for creating habitat and reforming these habitats for our very, very homeless insects, mammals, birds, and fish. It's about really paying attention to the nano and the micro with how we reform and we find our balance back again with nature. So I would say a bad garden design isn't really accommodating homes for nature and homes for planting communities and the re-establishment of its own totally perfect ability to do it itself. It's just allowing for these things to happen. And I think if I was going to be definitive about bad, I would say without homes for other things, I think then we're out of relationship with our garden, and that's a design that's not going very well.
Melissa, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to say a very similar thing. So I think any design, whatever scale it's at, whatever budget it's at, if it has taken the human element above and beyond everything else and not looked at it in a holistic way and not given equal footing to nature and people, then I think that's a bad design. So whether it's a tiny pocket courtyard that's, got a bit of fake turf, or whether it's an enormous estate with lots of chemical use and manicured lawns and no space for nature, either is bad in my book. I think
So do you
you've got
think
to
it's a
give
kind
balance.
of case about kind of aesthetics and what we believe to be a beautiful garden is?
I think that's definitely a part of it, because I also think that's changed a lot recently. I think people are beginning to understand that a beautifully manicured space is not necessarily beautiful, and it just takes people to, if I walk into a garden and see a wildflower patch that people might think is weedy, but my first response is, wow, that's beautiful, people's perception of that changes very quickly, and they start saying, yeah, that's beautiful, and then they tell their friends that come in, that's beautiful, and suddenly perception changes. So I think that's really important. But yeah, I think, and this is the first day of No Mow May for anyone that doesn't know, so this is the time to let everything go a little bit wild in your garden and not mow your lawns for the month. But yeah, I think that's all about perception, and I think the perception is changing.
Adam, any thoughts?
Well, I mean, Melissa and Lulu have covered it amazingly, but there was just a few things. I think in terms of the process that you get your materials, a lot of our stone, the cheap stone, comes in from India or China. Huge carbon footprint, and also normally extracted using dubious labour techniques. So simple decisions around sourcing your material. We will not get have any imported stone now, unless it's a very specific stone. We really need it coming from somewhere like Italy or Portugal, and rarely that. We tend to try and go to the local county. Now there is a cost implication for that, but at that point, rather than using a cheap Indian sandstone, which never looks nice anywhere apart from in India, we'd use a local gravel, or we'd find other solutions. So we'd design around that. And likewise with the plants, I think a lot of the plants that I'm not going to name names, but a lot of plants that are sold because they fit on the shelves, because they work within the context of a superstore or a supermarket. And I think that a lot of nurseries have gone peat-free, and they're trying to, and a lot of them are responding to a requirement for more naturalising plants. But that again, being aware of where the plants come from, how they're looked after, asking for peat-free grown plants, that kind of thing. I mean, they're very practical points, but I think that that's part of the design. And aware that there's a cost implication to some of them, but trying to design around that.
Okay, so if our gardens are having an impact and we want to make that better, how do we measure that? Because unless we measure and we understand where the impact is happening, how are we ever going to improve on that and make those changes? So, some of the things we've been discussing just now, sort of habitat loss, carbon footprints, and soil degradation. Should we be putting numbers on that, or does the impact lie in other areas?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't really, personally, I wouldn't want to be putting numbers on it, because I think the most important thing about your garden is it's your conversation with nature. And it's an entry for a lot of people. But also I had, on the occasions where I've not been growing, I don't really know what's going on with the seasons. I'm out of sync. My grandma and my grandfather were farmers, and they used to have this expression which was lookering. They'd go lookering around the farm. And it was just wandering around, seeing what was going on, and they said it was one of the most important things they did. And they just were guardians of that farm, and they saw what was going on. And I just think it's that kind of thing that's important. It's reminding us that we are in conversation with nature, whether we want to be or not, that we're allowed to be in it, and that we can engage with it. And I think, yes, of course, carbon capture. I think growing your own veg is probably the most empowering thing you can possibly do. But I'm not quite sure how you would measure it. I sort of would rather leave that to corporates and governments and people like that.
So kind of looking at this idea of our conversation with nature, through the pandemic, the world sort of just slowed down. Do you think, Melissa, that kind of people's communication and relationship with nature changed through the pandemic? Was that perhaps one plus side, that the opportunity to do a little bit of lookering around the garden just started to happen because we weren't having so many kind of face-to-face conversations?
Absolutely. I mean, there was a dramatic change. Seed sales boomed, seeds got sold out. You couldn't get compost. And I remember going to the garden centre, I had to pick up compost, and there was no peat-free there. And so I decided that I wouldn't actually take any. But, everything was difficult to get hold of in that time. And we as garden designers could carry on working. And I'm sure I speak for a lot of us, having spoken to a lot of people, it's never been busier.
Yeah.
And it hasn't really let up yet. I think it sparked an immense desire to get back to a very basic way of living. And I think there was a slight panic side of it in terms of, what if we can't get food? Let's grow a lettuce, which is amazing, but you also realise that we need farms, we need farmers, we need people to produce food, because as much as, I grow a lot, but I'm not self-sufficient, and I know I'm not self-sufficient. So I think I think that connection to nature was incredible, and I think anyone lucky enough to have a garden at that time felt unbelievably grateful. And anyone who didn't, was desperate to get to wild plants
Actually, I mean,
and
I
spaces.
recognise in my office when my staff were coming in that my relationship with the plants in my office, I have about 70, quite changed. I could literally see them talking to me, albeit at a very different pace to which we might communicate with people on social media or face to face, but they were definitely talking and changing and shifting and moving and telling me little messages about being needed to water or repotted. What do you think about this communication with nature, Lulu?
I think you're right. I think this time of lockdown and where everything sort of closed in was also a very important time, just energetically for us all. I don't know. There's so many changes happening, aren't there, on so many levels, and I think there's a kind of, for me personally, there's a deconstruction in process of just trying to shift the constructs that created the me that was, in a sense, and trying to arrive into the place of me that is. And I think our communications with nature are going to help us in that process. They're going to help me, because it's about dropping in and just connecting. It's connecting to our home and the thing that gives us everything that we truly need. And the closer we are to it, the more comfortable we are in that relationship, I think the weller we are.
It sounds like there was quite a sort of spiritual connection for you.
I think I fully have a spiritual connection with nature. I fully talk to nature as my guide, and all the realms of it. You know, the tree spirits, the plant spirits. I'm often thanking my garden and the trees in it. I feel really, guided by them. And I think it's just me opening up and letting myself receive that and be in that, and just getting myself out of the way. And in that sense, I have a lot of trust with nature and its impeccable ability. I think for me the process is just getting out of the way, and by sitting and witnessing and being in nature and just spending time with it, that's how that develops and evolves.
So the talk series is all about Save Our Soils. So I get the feeling, you go to the garden centre and there are a million products out there all screaming at you with their kind of careful nudging techniques and their packaging and their graphics, all wanting you to buy into some form of soil management or preservation or pesticides or herbicides. Where are we at with our soils right now? Because obviously the soils, for all intents and purposes, look quite static. But obviously, a handful of soils theoretically contains more microbiota than there are people on the planet. So obviously, an enormously live, dynamic thing, but that we're treating in a very sort of human-centred way of like, well, we can manage this, don't worry about nature. Where are we at with our soils and our gardens and our understanding of soil health? Adam?
Good question. I mean, the treatment of soil in landscaping practice is appalling. The contemporary treatment of soil, a lot of people refer to it as dirt, which a lot of people...
It's quite insulting, isn't it? I find it, yeah.
It is.
It's quite an Americanised term.
Yeah, put the dirt over there. But the DEFRA put out an amazing document. It's very thick, and it's all about soil management if you are moving it around. And very few people read it, but it talks about how you keep the soil healthy and move it around. Ideally, you don't move it around at all, because it is a living thing, and it builds over hundreds of years, thousands even. And by moving it at all, even digging it, you are destroying its structure. And you're releasing carbon. And I know that farmers have to make a living, but across the border into Somerset, the reason we had such bad floods in 2014 was mainly, I would say, living in that area, due to the increased use of maize. And you can drive around during a downpour in October or November, and you will see soil that's taken hundreds of years to build up just washing down the lanes. And the farmers know that too. My local farmer, he said we had to stop growing it because we were just losing our soil. And it is practice, different practices where we reduce digging and we treat it as if it was a living thing rather than a growing medium. I think that would be a start.
So what does that mean in practical terms? Can you explain a little bit more about
no
no-dig
dig
gardening
Yeah,
and
so
how do you actually
how do you do no dig?
do it? Yeah.
So no dig on a garden scale works really easily. I garden on very heavy clay, and if I'm making a new bed, I don't even remove the turf. I would mow it very short. I put cardboard on top, and then a very thick layer of either manure or homemade compost. If you can do that a few months before, I've done it as well, where I've then oversown it with something like a mustard seed that comes up very quickly. And then when you're ready to plant, you just cut down the mustard seed, chuck it on the compost, and then you're ready to plant straight into that compost, and you haven't disturbed the soil at all. And the fact that I can grow vegetables and literally pull potatoes up with my hands in heavy clay is testament to it working. And I've only been doing this for 5 years, and it definitely works. And then that has translated into my work in a very different way. So if I'm doing a design, I'm now quite careful if there are areas that we don't have to track over with heavy machinery and we don't have to dig up. I'm a bit like so when we design, we put in tree protection fencing, and we say don't put any heavy machinery over here. I'll do the same with planting beds. So if I know they're going to be planted, I say don't go on them, don't touch them, don't dig them up. Because, landscapers go in, they want to take off the bad soil and bring in new topsoil, which is dead when it arrives. So I think there are things that we can do in our design, as well as it's easier at home to do it because you've got a much longer window to do it. I can leave a bed for months without planting it, whereas when I'm designing, people don't want to leave a bed for a few months with a big thing of mulch over it. So, but the more that you can explain that process to people, and the more they can understand that soil is living and it has an incredible structure to it and it's alive, and we need to do everything we can to protect it because they're spending an awful lot of money on plants, and I say there's no point putting these expensive plants in if they're going to go into rubbish soil. So I think you can get to people that way. It's a very practical, we've spent a lot of money on these plants, let's give them the best possible opportunity. So yeah, it works really well. I'm amazed by it.
And in terms of the sort of the quality of the produce that you get, I'm kind of really interested in this idea of microbiota. Of course, we have soil microbiota, and we equally have a microbiota in ourselves. It weighs about 2 kilograms. It's quite a big thing, I think, inside us. Is there a sort of parallel between the soil that we create and the health of that soil and our own sort of physical health? Is that an idea that you subscribe to?
It is, yeah. And I think for me, soil, just starting on that soil concept of soil, I think for me the things that come into my mind straight away when you're talking about soil health is seed bank. The fact that there's a seed bank in our soil, which is so intelligent and ancient, and is us being aware of that and coming into that understanding and relationship with our soil, that it's all there. Given space and time to itself, what will come up, what that land or, needs, landscape needs, is actually there. And also soil intelligence. Soil is unbelievably intelligent. Our gut is unbelievably intelligent. And I see the parallel between the soil and our gut in a major way. And we touched on it, didn't we? And I see that we're stripping our soil, and with it is coming disease and huge problems, such as tree diseases. Is a major problem in our lives at the moment. With oak, ash. We've had elm, horse chestnut. I mean, it's just catastrophic. But in our gut, the health problems that humans are suffering at the moment: cancers, Alzheimer's. And many grave gut-related diseases that affect people's lives and autoimmune systems and nervous systems. If I'm starting to see them in parallel, and our soil intelligence needs to be respected and nurtured. and our gut intelligence equivalent, and it's almost like our internal landscape and our external, and we're mirroring it, and we're in this very grave situation where we've depleted both on an unbelievably astonishing level, and it's time to totally change that and move the other way and work together to rebuild it, you know. But soil nourishment and goodness, when it's got the strong mycorrhiza and those sort of really, really delicate bacteria that are really, really supporting soil and tree and plant immunology, you'll get these really beautiful filigree plants growing that you'll only find now in the deepest arboreal forests of Europe on this kind of sort of climate, you know, area. And it's, you know, it's those like orchids, but even more fine, and it's those special plants that, you know, with the acid rain, the nitrogen in the rain, the nitrogen in the soil, they're just, all of that goodness is dissolving, and you know, it's not available. We've got to clean the entire system, from the rains, the upper atmosphere, all the way through to the soil. It's the whole system.
It's quite a big ask for a garden.
I think Mark touched on it. We've got to work together. You know, we've got no choices, have we?
So we've got to enhance that sense of biodiversity to increase the resilience both of nature and also for our own health and well-being. When we spoke on the phone a few days ago, you talked about the idea of creating a bioabundance. Can you explain what that is and how you might create it and what it might look like?
How long have you got?
Words.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think the last few years, Lulu and I and our studio, all the guys in our studio, we've been on this journey around rewilding. And one of the things that's really interesting about rewilding is it just changed, for me, and I think a lot of people involved, it just changed our perspective, and I'm sure everyone who's come across it feels the same. It changed it from one of a feeling of despair to hope, and this feeling that it's the incredible regenerative powers of nature given space and the correct minor interventions, which tend to be what's called ecosystem engineers, so beavers, boar, grazers in the Yellowstone Park, even wolves, you know, even predators can be ecosystem engineers. And walking on some of we went to the oldest the most long-standing beaver habitat in the UK, which is just north of Dartmoor, a while back, and it was sort of, you're walking around and you keep having these aha moments. It's like, oh, of course, oh yeah, of course, that's why it's like that. And the noise, the insect noise, the noise of the birds, we're not only losing biodiversity, we're actually losing a whole soundscape. And so I think that's what I would see as bioabundance. So Rewilding Britain talk about 5% of the UK can easily be rewilded. It's just marginal land without impacting on food production at all. So
does that 5% include our gardens?
Well, I think there's. I came across a statistic the other day that said that there's more. The area of gardens in the UK is bigger than the area of nature reserves. So yes. And actually, if you look at a garden, it's got often a patchwork of gardens. They've got that kind of mosaic that you want to see in an abundant habitat, which is a third trees, a third shrubs, and a third lawn or grassland.
Or meadow, yeah.
Yeah, or meadow. And a lot of the bird life, for example, they understand that terrain, they can move through it. And so, yeah, I think nature-friendly gardening has a huge role to play. And it also, again, it engages people with it, and it gives children a chance to see wildlife.
So, this is maybe the most stupid question I'm going to ask. What would the difference look like between a bioabundant garden and a neglected garden? You know, when you kind of move into a house, you see a house that's just been forgotten, the garden's kind of overgrown with, you know, thistles and kind of brambles and all sorts of things, and it's just been left to do its own thing, and there's a kind of magic about that, you know, kind of secret garden. Is that so different from a bioabundant, or is that a little bit more, like you say, bioengineered?
Wow, yeah.
How does it not look neglected?
Yeah, you're talking about my godfather's garden, aren't you? Yeah, that was full of nature, but you couldn't actually walk around it. You know, that's the trouble. I mean, I think it's sort of that level of interventions, because if you're lucky enough to have a small piece of land, then yes, no dig beds in one area where you're growing your veg, and that's a really important thing to do, both for your own health and also for reducing carbon footprints. And then I think it's also, if you just let it go to bramble, you have created habitat, but it's quite a sort of specific habitat, and you might want to really be introducing more of a wildflower meadow into it. You might want to be putting a mosaic of plant communities in it so that you can enjoy it, and also you've got habitat for a range of animals. So yeah, I think it would be more managed, but you'd just be clear about what your interventions were.
So lots of ideas going on. Melissa, could you tell me, you've spent a lot of time cultivating your own garden to increase the sense of bioabundance, and could you just tell us a little bit about your story, your journey of where did you start, and has that been a linear approach, or has that shifted and changed over the years?
So I think although wildlife was always kind of my primary obsession, I guess, the wilder garden side coincided with us getting an acre of land, which I felt was huge, and also coincided with reading Rewilding by Isabella Tree about the Knepp estate, and a few other books on soil health and our relationship with the land. So I started to, it was that perception change of I want this garden to be for wildlife. And I've kind of gone along the lines of leaving areas totally alone, totally unmown, and then I've got some cultivated areas. And I think we were discussing this before, but when you mow a grass path through a wilded area, suddenly that wilded area looks like you haven't neglected it. So there's a perception of care, which is really important. And once we know that we care for something, you have other people have a much deeper connection to it. You probably have it yourself, whether you've mown the path or not. But I did have some ecologists into my garden recently because I wanted to know if what I was doing was right, or is it just in my head that I think it's right. And they did suggest that some areas had a slightly more intervention, so that I did mow some areas and try and create some different type of meadow areas. So the bits that we've totally left, I've got oak trees now growing in them, and which I think is wonderful. But if I now treat some areas more as a meadow, I'll get some of the local meadow flowers coming in as well. And there was an ecological report at Great Dixter when they were one of the big gardens, and they, I think Fergus Garrett was trying to get them to do an ecological survey at Great Dixter, and they were surveying the kind of nature reserves around, and he said, let's go and have a look. And they found more biodiversity in Great Dixter than they did in the surrounding nature reserves. So I think we've got to have this like mosaic and tapestry and balance and habitats for all sorts of things. And, there was, we can put crushed aggregate down and grow wildflowers in it. We don't necessarily have to ship in topsoil all the time. I think it's really important just with our food systems, when we've kind of reduced our food systems down to a few varieties and we've lost that biodiversity. We need to increase it everywhere with our food, with our wildlife, with our thoughts, with everything that we're doing. So I think it's not as simple as if you totally neglect somewhere, I don't think that means it's better or worse. It's like the native versus non-native debate. There are pros and cons for both. But I think it's the mix that we really need to get, and we can see it in our own gardens. We can see that that, you know, we've got woodpeckers that come to the south-facing bank because it's got ants in it, and we've got, you know, you've got that little tiny microhabitat, and they find it. That's the exceptional thing about nature. It finds the habitats that it needs.
It's something that NEP have seen.
Yeah,
How do these
astonishing.
storks know to come
Yeah.
to NEP
Yeah.
across all those other cultivated farms? Lulu, I know that you are... it's fascinating to hear that story over a longer period of time. But Adam and Lulu, you're creating a garden at Chelsea. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and your approach?
Sure. We're creating a garden at Chelsea Flower Show to show what happens when beavers enter a landscape and how they activate and bioengineer, and you know, how they affect the landscape around them. What they are is they're a keystone species. So you consider an arch, and the keystone species in the keystone in the centre. That arch will hold up because of the keystone. This arch holds up nature and its habitats in a sense. Wildlife, well, no, nature in total hold up because of something like the beaver. They work. The beavers work sort of almost in like collaboration, cooperation with all different species. You know, the water that they affect and change, they slow the water down, they create pools and rivulets. So invertebrates and vertebrates start to flourish. The bird life, the fish eating birds and all other bird lives around that all start to then flourish. And beavers take down trees and leave branches over water. So kingfishers come again. You know, kingfishers need that. You know, it's back to that idea of everything needs a home. We can't have, you can't thrive if you don't have a home. The beavers create many homes for all these levels of plants, of the nano requirements for microclimate, plant colonizations and habitats, all the way up to the way trees function healthily in an environment. So we're showing a beaver lodge, a beaver dam, what happens to a stream when the beavers have decided to kind of create their dam there. It then breaks into rivulets, waters, pools, and we don't have beavers coming to London. They are almost ready for them, I think, but they're not quite there. But we are working on a soundscape. So we've got 5 speakers through the gardens that are going to be emulating the sounds of nature to try and help people kind of arrive into the space. And it's really a slice of landscape, and we're just trying to show that really amazing, just to show people a bit of life and a bit of ecology in its natural form, and see what people think about it. Yeah.
In a way, it's kind of amazing that we're talking about gardening and we're talking about bringing nature back into our gardens. I mean, isn't it weird that this sounds like a radical act, a subversive act? How could that be? I mean, gardens are a little pocket of nature. I mean, what's happened for us, you to be kind of like the revolutionaries of the gardening world, when you're just welcoming back the thing that should always have been there? Thoughts, Adam? You look like you were a punk at one point.
I don't know. I just think people do love nature. They really do, and people know.
But we've been kind of forced down an avenue to accept something else, haven't we? Nature is manicured and perfect, and it reflects our perfection of Palladian villas.
Yeah. Well, is it back to that internal external landscape? Has our internal landscape sort of honed down and narrowed down so much that we reflect it back in the way that we see to take care of our external, and like you were saying, the kind of diversity and different things, different ideas is also important. I mean, have we? I don't know. Have we narrowed it down, and do we need to just burst open the riverbanks?
I mean, in a way, we've become very human-centric about our gardens, and now we're kind of opening it up, not just sort of thinking ourselves at the top of a pyramid, but very much part of a kind of an essential part of the kind of interconnected natural systems.
So there's a longing there, and people feel it, and I think it's the most important thing is that children meet nature. and that they have those moments, those wow moments. You know, if you go to the murmuration of the starlings on the Somerset Levels, that's wow, when you just are in awe. And the thing that nature has the capacity to do, particularly bird life and animal life, is those moments. And they're sort of, they just encourage this love affair, this age-old love affair we have had with nature. Recently, as a culture, we slightly turned our backs, but I think it was by accident. I hope it wasn't deliberate.
Yeah.
But also, if you walk into a garden centre now, to me that has nothing to do with gardening. Like, they're so removed from what natural, instinctive gardening is, and people then don't trust their instincts because they're being sold all of this stuff that they don't need. And I think probably deep inside, you know, when people say to me, well, I can't do it, you're like, it's within us to plant a seed.
And it's the seed, and watching the seed grow, it's so different.
So do you think, much like the Insulate Britain group, we're going to start to see people chaining themselves outside gardening centres to stop people going in and just let the gardens do themselves? Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Okay, so I'm just instigating a little bit of positive action there. You're welcome to take that idea off. Don't say that. I made you do it. So we're kind of nearing the end. Just kind of delving into your world and your inspiration. Could you just, each of you, tell me a garden, a project, an inspirational figure in your life that the audience could go away and look up and kind of learn from? Adam. Maybe it's a garden project, could be a garden designer.
No,
Natural system.
For me, it's landscape. For me, it would be the Burren in County Clare. If you want to go and see the most incredible plant communities, go there, read about it. It's got plants, alpine plants. It's got what you'd expect to see on the west coast of Ireland, and it even has some plants from much further north. It's a beautiful landscape. Likewise, Killarney National Park has got some of its own species there. The Killarney lily. Kerry lily, sorry, and the Killarney filmy fern, only found there, and also in Andalusia, so possibly came across on the boats, we don't know. And then closer to home, the Levels, they are going to be rewilded, and one day there will be Dalmatian pelicans flying across the Levels again, as there was before.
Where are the Levels?
Somerset Levels, sorry, yeah. There's some incredible nature reserves there. I think I went, there is a particular, just near Borough Mump, there is a nature reserve where I saw maybe 600 lapwings flying in a murmuration, and followed by an equivalent size flock of starlings. And when the lapwings murmurate, they flash black and white, black and white, black and white. And then behind them was the sort of silvery grey, dark grey of the starlings. Just wonderful. Yeah,
awe-inspiring, isn't it? That sense of awe is something we do get.
Just wonderful.
Yeah. Melissa, where do you draw your inspiration from?
I would say very similarly, if I was given this is going to be awful, isn't it, being in a very important historic garden, but given the choice between visiting a garden or a natural landscape, I would always choose a natural landscape. And I think getting to know your local natural landscape is really important to see what is growing naturally, what you might be able to bring into your own garden. But also, as a plug for another designer, Marion Boswell has just written a book called The Sustainable Garden.
Marion Boswell.
Yeah.
Boswell.
And I think on a very practical level, that is a book that you can take. She's got projects in it, how you can build things, how you can source things. It's just, for a garden scale book that is going to do some good in the world. The Sustainable Garden. Okay. And well worth buying if you're thinking that you would like your garden to be a little, I don't want to say more natural, but maybe a little more in tune with what's going on.
So that might be in the folder.
Might well be.
I don't know. Yeah. And Lulu.
Well, I think I'd probably refer to the incredible landscapes and estates we've been lucky enough to be visiting in the last year as we've been building this garden for Chelsea, and it's through the Rewilding Britain network. and they have all their projects listed on the websites. So there'd be several that I would allude to, but I mean, all of them are fascinating. Watching a rewilding process of farmlands or wilder lands. Things, you know, I've seen in this last year, things that have really astounded me are things like an exploding woodland, where an old spruce woodland has been exploded up, ripped out, and sort of plopped out onto the fields around it, and then just this sort of chaotic sort of scene of trees and branches and dead wood and all of that. But when you start rootling around those areas, as we have been trying to find beaver gnawed sticks for our garden, you suddenly notice all the fungal activity, all these little plant communities, and you just start to see this bioflourishing and bioabundance in process and taking place. And I'm so inspired, and I recommend everyone to get in touch with that, because these places are accessible, and they're it's wonderful to meet the people doing them, because they're so inspired, and they're like kids at Christmas. They are like, oh my God, and then this has arrived, and then this has arrived, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. So alongside our gardens and these projects that are happening, it's a changing face, isn't it, of our landscapes at the moment? It's really great.
Lovely. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time for questions, and I do mean questions with a question mark at the end rather than statements. So do we have any questions from the audience? We've got a roving microphone with Bex over here. So if you want to just put your hands up. Mark.
Thank you, love that. Thank you very much. No dig, so we're doing a bit of that at home, or we're not doing anything, we're just letting it. Can I be really honest? I massively miss digging. How other than turning compost, what can I go and dig that's not going to cause any problems?
You can plant some mature trees. They need a hole to be dug in.
Yeah.
I mean, you can dig out areas and then replace them with a different kind of aggregate or different kinds of sand, and they will produce different habitats for different animals if you really need to dig.
Can't you go to your local farm and offer to help, like muck out and stuff? Like get a bit of community.
I really miss that looking at it.
Yeah, maybe you just need to go and like buddy up with your.
Yeah.
Game on, thank you. He is unreconstructed, but he'll have to need his help.
Another question. There's a girl in the green jumper. Did you have your hand up?
Boy.
Did you want? Boy. That's
Boy.
No, sorry. Okay, sorry. 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 Lady in the orange.
I haven't really thought about this question, so it's a bit raw. Earlier you talked about gardens at Great Dixter, for example, having more bioabundance than the national parks or the managed areas. I do remember seeing something on my Facebook page earlier this week about that and being genuinely horrified. I live in the New Forest National Park, which is horribly managed. Sorry, everybody. Very pretty, lots of ponies. Really not good for the wildlife. What, as an industry, what as an industry are you aware of that's happening to help share that knowledge? Because as a consumer through social media, I don't see there's much going on there. People don't seem they seem to think that the national parks are, wow, let's go to the national park, it'll be really amazing, it's the place to go to see the wildlife. It's really not. It's actually one of the most damaged places to see the wildlife because it's so accessible to people, whereas gardens on private land isn't. What's your experience in the industry to help us feel more confident that there's something going on, I hope?
I think for shall I speak to that?
Yeah.
I mean, just personally, I think I learn. The more I learn about rewilding, and places like NEP open up with such some incredible information about all the layers of ecosystems and nature, and what's actually required for nature to thrive. And Isabella Tree's book Wilding, and other books on rewilding, there are different. I can recommend even more, but the I think as we learn, as we relearn, it's a forgotten language, and as we relearn our beautiful, abundant nature and what it needs, then I think we just start changing. We start separating, and places like the New Forest, will be seen as overdone, overgrazed, overmanaged, and under-resourced for other aspects of nature to thrive. So I think it's just, teaching yourself by going to these places and speaking with people, and then encouraging your community to do the same, and to also celebrate your land where you are, and do something small that does change things, but with everyone, celebrate something in your community that is working. And then let that filter out. I don't know if that answers fully what you can do, but I do think that the amount of information is tumbling out now about how different it needs to look in order for natural abundance.
Can I? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I mean, with regards to that particular report, I think it was disseminated through the horticultural, certainly through the design world, quite significantly. It was astonishing. And then when you link it to the New Forest, strangely, New Forest I think has got probably the most, the best biodiversity of any area in the UK. I know it's astonishing, a lot of it is insect and fungal, who are quite sort of tolerant to visitors and dogs. But the New Forest does, relatively speaking, have that mosaic, that sort of thirds relationship between pastures or meadows, scrub, and old growth forest, and I think, or mature forest. And I think that was what they found at Great Dixter, was that again it had this sort of golden ratio, if you like, a third. And I think certainly we've all read that report, and we do go back to it, and we find it really helpful and really encouraging as well, because it's not a wild garden or a non-native garden. There's quite easily with rewilding or wilding, people make it into a binary argument, and it's not. I mean, the University of Sheffield, James Hitchmuth has done, and also Nigel Dunnett, have done incredible work on the relevance of non-native plants as a source of nectar for generalist insects. And so I think it has landed, and it takes a while for these things, but I know a lot of designers were really intrigued by it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think also we can't always see what a rich landscape looks like, because it might be in the fungal growth underneath the ground. I was actually at NEP last week, and they were saying that there's some chalk meadows just outside of NEP, and he said for those it would be the worst possible thing to rewild those, because it would turn into scrub, and you would lose this unbelievable diversity of plant life and hence insect life. So I think we can't look at it in a binary fashion of wilding is, I think after reading Wilding I was like, well, this is the answer, everywhere needs to be wilded, but then you start to understand a little bit more that it's the creation of different habitats that I think is really important.
Yeah.
Time for one more question, one last one. Who's gentleman in the green jacket?
Quick position statement, and I'll do a question. So we've got 3 pillars of sustainability, and for me the fourth one is always leadership. And so my question is, in influencing us as gardeners, bearing in mind 90% of the gardening world probably doesn't think too sustainably, is there a lot of scope for legislation at a local government level that forces rewilding at a civic level in the community? So we introduce ponds, we have we don't mow, we have all that, and that would act as a sort of leadership leverage towards more rewilding at a domestic level, so people start to accept it as a way forward.
Yeah.
Anybody want to?
I can. Yeah. I mean, I'll have a go. I mean, interestingly, rewilding is now government policy. The ELA, recent ELA that came out, has made it policy. If you're lucky enough to have a minimum of 500 hectares, and which some people do. I mean, Lulu's really involved with the Selwood Forest Partnership, who have got a group of landowners together who have achieved a sort of viable area of land for that rewilding process. But I think what the government's done is weak on community-led ventures, and this is and actually if you're looking at people trying to encourage nature, a lot of it is enthusiasts and just little people without huge great pieces of land. But the legislation is sort of naturally, I guess, heading towards that. Whether you can get government policy to put over a certain amount of community land and what that would look like, I mean, that would be interesting. I'm not sure the paper that they put out has included that. And it was flagged up as a weakness. And it was also flagged up that it was not really very well linked to regenerative agriculture, which needs to go alongside the wilder marginal land areas and regenerative agriculture, so we're rebuilding soil. And we have food security.
Okay. All right, well, I think we're going to end it there. We're all going to be around, so if you've got any other little questions, I'm sure our panel will be happy to answer them if you want to come up afterwards. So it just leaves it to me to thank our fantastic panellists, Lulu, Melissa and Adam, for taking part today. So if we can have a little bit of a round of applause for them.
Thanks, Ollie.
It's been absolutely fascinating. I've loved some of the terms that we've heard: rootling, lookering, bio-flourishing, bio-abundance. All these things. I'm going to go and do a bit of that stuff tomorrow, my day off. So thank you for inspiring me and hopefully inspiring the audience. My name's Oliver Heath and I've been here for Planted Country. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.
Thank you.